Hare Krishna. All right. Sorry about that. So, Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Okay. On this 10th day of August, 2022 in San Diego, we're reading from Srimad Bhagavad Gita as it is. Translation and commentary by His Divine Grace A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada. Tapas, you there? Is it 20?
It's 21, Prabhu.
21. Text 21 on page 248. Okay, we'll just do. Bhaya sparshe svasaktatma. Let's try it again. Bhaya sparshe svasaktatma. Vindatyatmane yat sukham.
Vindatyatmane sukham.
Sabrahma yoga yuktatma.
Sabrahma yoga yuktatma.
Sukham akshayamashnute.
Sukham akshayamasnute.
Okay, in the service of speeding things up, I'll just read the word by words in translation. Bhaya sparsheshu, in external sense pleasure, asakta atma, one who is not attached, vindati, enjoys, atmani, in the self, yat, that which, sukham, happiness, saha, he, brahma yoga, by concentration in Brahman. Yukta atma, self-connected, sukham, happiness, akshayam, unlimited, ashnute, enjoys. Translation. Such a liberated person is not attracted to material sense pleasure, but is always in trance, enjoying the pleasure within. In this way, the self-realized person enjoys unlimited happiness, for he concentrates on the Supreme. So let's just read the translations to the previous one, because he's referring back to that liberated person. A person who neither rejoices upon achieving something pleasant, nor laments upon obtaining something unpleasant, who is self-intelligent, who is unbewildered, and who knows the science of God, is already situated in transcendence. Purport to text 21. Sri Yamunacharya, a great devotee in Krishna consciousness, said, Yadavadi mamacheta Krishna padara vinde Navanamadasadhaman yudyatam runtum asit Tolabadibatanari sangame smaryamani Bhavati mukhavikara sushtunishtivanam cha. Quote, since I have been engaged in the transcendental loving service of Krishna, realizing ever new pleasure in him, whenever I think of sex pleasure, I spit at the thought, and my lips curl with distaste. A person in Brahma Yoga or Krishna consciousness is so absorbed in the loving service of the Lord that he loses his taste for material sense pleasure altogether. The highest pleasure in terms of matter is sex pleasure. The whole world is moving under its spell, and the materialist cannot work at all without this motivation. But a person engaged in Krishna consciousness can work with greater vigor without sex pleasure, which he avoids. This is the test in spiritual realization. Spiritual realization and sex pleasure go ill together. A Krishna conscious person is not attracted to any kind of sense pleasure due to his being a liberated soul. Om jnana timarandasya jnanandana shalakaya chakshur unmidatam mena tasmai shri gurave namaha. I was born in the darkest of ignorance, but my spiritual master Srila Prabhupada opened my eyes with the torchlight of knowledge. I offer my humble obeisance unto him and to all members of Sri Parampara. So, Krishna has been describing that soul whose, text 17, he says, one's intelligence, mind, faith, and refuge are all fixed in the Supreme, and that Supreme is Krishna. Then one becomes fully cleansed of misgivings or doubts through complete knowledge and thus proceeds straight on the path of liberation. So he's describing the advanced Krishna conscious person who sees everyone equally because he sees the soul, vidya vinaya sampane. He sees the true knowledge in text 18. He sees with equal vision a learned and gentle Brahman, a cow, an elephant, a dog, and a dog-eater or outcast. It doesn't mean that he deals with them all on the same platform, but he sees the oneness in that they're all spirit souls. And so he recognizes that, and the kinship is there. He's also a spirit soul. And those whose minds are established in sameness and equanimity have already conquered the conditions of birth and death. They are flawless like Brahman, and thus they are already situated in Brahman, means pure Krishna consciousness. So this text 21 and text 22 is one of my favorites in the whole Gita, and they go together. So bayasparsheshu asaktatma. Bayasparsheshu literally means touching external things with your senses. Asaktatma has no attraction for that. Because vimdatyatmani yatsukam, he is enjoying that pleasure within. This is the reservoir of pleasure, which is like unlimited, ever increasing. Krishna is anandam buddhivardhanam, as the Lord Chaitanya describes Sankirtan, if one was absorbed in the holy name, as an ever increasing ocean of bliss. It may sound Pollyannish, how can there be such a thing? But that's because we're always seeing and measuring things through our material vision. All of these material pleasures, beginning with sex life, is just a pale reflection of the infinite pleasure that is available on the spiritual platform. Because it's all being mediated through matter, and matter is limited. Matter is limited and temporary. And everything is changing. There's no question of getting a platform of ultimate happiness and staying on it forever in the material world. It's just we're moving and living within an extremely complicated machine called the material body, which is created by Krishna, so that we can imitate, we can try to enjoy it as he does, and be disappointed, and then hopefully come in contact with a source of transcendental knowledge, which can tell us how to end this hopeless, self-defeating activity. And so the way Krishna does it, he comes himself and speaks the Bhagavad Gita and the Uddhava Gita in the 11th canon. We shouldn't neglect that. That's a really important instruction of Krishna. And he empowers his pure devotees to also transmit that pure knowledge. And not only to transmit it, but to personify it. If we didn't have examples of the perfection of the Bhagavad Gita and the other knowledge, then we wouldn't think it's possible to actually do it. But Srila Prabhupada and other great acharyas, they show how, yes, anyone, if he takes the process as appropriate in this age, namely centering on the chanting of the holy name, we can advance in devotional service. And this devotional service advancement means transmuting and purifying our desires. It all depends on our desire. And when we're in the modes of nature, the desires are mediated through the material body and the material mind. But when we begin to become transcendental and we begin to taste Krishna consciousness, then we're going up the modes until we come to the mode of goodness and pure goodness. And in pure goodness, the pleasure of being Krishna conscious, glorifying Krishna, associating with devotees, chanting the holy name, doing everything that's available, Srila Prabhupada made available through great work in founding and developing Krishna consciousness movement, becomes the source of real pleasure. And the desire for the lower pleasure fades away. And this verse is quoted twice in the Bhagavad Gita. This Yadavadi Mama Chetak by Ramanujacharya and Yamunacharya, excuse me. And I heard a wonderful story about Yamunacharya. He's the spiritual master of Ramanujacharya, great soul. And as a young man, he was a wonderful devotee, very brilliant, and he was a brahmachari, and he was very great at debate. And so he wanted to challenge this court pundit. You heard this story before? A little bit? So there was this court pundit, and no one had ever defeated him. He was very, very sharp, great wit, and brilliant. But Yamunacharya, he was like 15 years old, something like that. And so he felt that he could do it. So it was quite an interesting thing. And the king to add interest to the whole debate, he said, well, if you were able to defeat my court pundit, then I'll give you half my kingdom. Here's this 15-year-old boy, and here's this pundit, he's defeated the greatest intellect. So I forgot the clever way he did it, but I'll tell you in another day. But he asked the pundit several questions, like riddles, and he couldn't answer any of them. And then Yamunacharya gave the answers, and after 3 or 4, then the pundit was defeated. So now he's got half a kingdom. So what happened to his brahmacharya? Now he owns all this. So he gets entangled, he's got a family and everything, So. But then what happened was that one of his old god brothers, from the old ashram days, came to pay a visit to King Yamunacharya. I don't think he was known as Acharya at that time. And he said, let's go for a walk. I said, sure, and they started walking around the wonderful gardens in the palace and everything, and then they get into the forest, And as they were walking, he started chanting all kinds of nectar shlokas, like sometimes you hear me chant these, they're all full of them in the Bhagavatam, that they had known back in the ashram days, and then Yamunacharya's reawakened his memory, and he knew all these things, and he started experiencing his old Krishna consciousness, and he just kept walking, and he just walked right out of that kingdom. And he renounced it, he became sannyasi, and he became Yamunacharya. And he wrote a book called Stotra Ratna, which means jewel-like verses, which Prabhupada would quote from often. So here he's revealing his mind, that he had that period when he was enjoying all these things, and now he finds it abominable. So this, it depends. The Brahma Yoga Yuktatma Sukha Makshayam Ashnute. So first of all, Bhaya Sparsep Asakthatma, the first phrase is, not at all attracted to the senses and their sense objects, ordinary sense gratification. Vindati Atmana Yatsukam, he's enjoying the pleasure within the soul, internal pleasure. In other words, spiritual pleasure. And he, Brahma Yoga Yuktatma, with his soul linked up in yoga, bhakti yoga, to Brahma. Brahma means Brahman, the supreme person, the absolute truth, to Krishna. Sukham akshnayam ashnute. He enjoys unbroken happiness, which is not available on the material plane. So this is Krishna is giving a hint, which is really described in great detail in the Bhagavatam and other literatures that we have of the kinds of pleasure and happiness available on the spiritual platform, and the perfect embodiment of that are the 6 Goswamis. They're great examples. Just like Yamunacharya gave up all that power, that wealth and everything for Krishna. So 3 of the Goswamis especially exemplify that: Rupa Goswami, Sanatana Goswami, and Raghunath Das Goswami. Raghunath Das Goswami was just a boy, but he was the only heir to like a great fortune. He was the son of great zamindars. Zamindar means landowners, and uncalculable wealth, and he was the only heir. And so they got him married to this very beautiful, goddess-like lady, very, pure. And but by that time, his mind and his heart had been won by Lord Chaitanya. He had met Nityananda. You all know Panihati festival, yoga and chip rice. You've experienced. So that was when he met Lord Nityananda, and he wanted to get his blessing so that he could go to Lord Chaitanya. So he said, "Don't worry, you'll be able to get free. But I order you," because he knew he had wealth, put on this fabulous yogurt and chip rice festival. So he laid out, he bought all this in this tremendous festival. So then sometime later, he's married, they had to have guards because they knew that he wanted to run off to Puri to Lord Chaitanya. And anyway, by a trick, he was able to get free and eventually join Lord Chaitanya. And he personified renunciation. More than even the other Goswamis. And then Rupa and Sanatan, they were I learned recently, the finance minister and the personal secretary of the king, Nawab Hussain Shah. And they had been, we just had Rupa Goswami's disappearance day yesterday. And Dharma Saita Prabhu was telling some accounts. And he described something that I knew already, because I always wondered, how did they ever come to become servants in that kingdom? Because they were devotees, they were great learned devotees. But they were so intelligent and so competent that the king wanted to use them to run the kingdom. So he threatened that, well, if you don't come into my service, then I'm going to start persecuting the Brahmins and the Vaishnavas. So on that basis, they said, okay, we'll do it. But eventually they met Lord Chaitanya, and so they got out of the service, and they joined and became extremely renounced. Hardly sleeping, hardly eating, not living under a different tree every night. But what was the standard of their spiritual advancement and their spiritual bliss? Gopi bhavada samartabda lahari kallola magno mahur. Again and again, they were floating and diving in the ocean of the highest and most intense levels of bhakti, the love of the gopis for Krishna. This is what their meditation was. So they were the wealthiest, even though externally they looked like the poorest. So that's this verse, in spades. Bhaya sparshesu ataktatma, not at all desiring any sense gratification, and always enjoying the happiness within, serving Krishna within and without when possible. Always linked to the Supreme Personality of Godhead in Bhakti Yoga, enjoying unlimited happiness. So that's this verse. It goes with the next one. Any questions on this particular verse? Bhaya sparshesu ataktatma.
Thanks, Dravida, for such a great class on this verse. I didn't hear your class on the previous verse, so maybe you've already answered this question, but because you went over it a little bit in this class, it talks about that a person doesn't rejoice upon achieving something or laments about something. So does that mean that I feel that naturally we have those emotions. So does that mean that starting out, we need to start to repress those emotions, or let those emotions free?
What this means, this is a person who, in other words, this is defining the person who is on the transcendence. So he doesn't rejoice upon receiving something materially pleasant, or laments upon attaining something unpleasant. In other words, this is the standard, is that you're situated on this platform of Krishna consciousness. And one of the verses that really hits home on this basis is one of the prayers of Lord Brahma in the 14th chapter, 10th canto. After the Brahma Vimohan Leela, where he steals the calves and boys, and then Krishna just manifests in identical calves and boys, and for a whole year the mothers don't know, but somehow their love for their kids and the cows' love for the calves is increasing. And so then after a year of our time, in a moment of his time, he comes back and he's bewildered. I thought I put them in my mystic slumber and hid them away in a cave. But there they are, And he comes down, and then Krishna manifests in all these Vishnu forms, and he offers these prayers. And one of the most famous ones is like this. Tatte nukampam susamikshamano bunjana evat nukatam vipaka. Ridvag vabhulbe vidadan namaste jiveti yo mukti padesa dayabak. Very, very important verse and very famous verse. So this is the standard for the pure devotee, is that whatever occurs, and in the material world, stuff happens. Like I sprained my ankle. Things go, unpleasant things happen, but also things, pleasant things happen. So either way, you see them both as Krishna's mercy. You're always saying, "Oh, Krishna's mercy," And in other words, it was difficult for me, because I'm not that advanced, and I'm laid up in bed, I can hardly walk. But I appreciated it when I started walking again, and I said, "Oh, thank you, Krishna! I can walk to the temple. I can actually dance a little bit in front of the." So I saw it as a blessing there. And I realized, okay, this is, some karma coming due, because he's giving a little touch. So that's that. So he said, one who understands whatever happens in the world, personally, okay, I'm getting a little token karma. Krishna is so merciful that he's minimized it. Even it could be very severe. It can always be more severe. So you can, and if something happens that's very pleasant and good, you say, "Oh, Krishna's so kind. He's giving me more facility to serve him." So in both instances, you have a positive view. In other words, you're seeing Krishna's mercy in everything, and you're always expecting more mercy. then someone who has this attitude, which if you study it psychologically, it always maintains a positive attitude toward Krishna. Then it's like you inherit a place in the spiritual world. You're sure to go back to God if you really have this all the time. So that's what's described here. Not parishe priyam prapa, not vijay prapa chapriyam. Is that in either case, when you get something priya, something dear, or apriya, stira buddhir. You're steady, you see. And this is throughout the literature. Even Prabhupada gives an example, even on the material plane, that if you're really absorbed your mind in something, like you hear how maybe on the battlefield or on the football field, you may get an injury, you don't even know it until there's a timeout, and suddenly, oh my God, I sprained my wrist, or because your mind is so much absorbed in the activity. So there's a verse where Kapila Dev mentions that, where he says, Marashya katam rishta shunbanti katayanti cha tapandi vivadastapa naitan mankata chetasan. He's describing the great devotees who are experiencing more and more absorption in Krishna consciousness, basically through associating with sadhus and hearing and chanting with them, becoming absorbed. Marashya katam rishta. Marashya has two meanings here. One is take shelter of me, or it means that sound vibrations which are taking shelter of me. In other words, deal with my name, form, qualities, pastime. Katam rishta, very sweet, very attractive, these sound vibrations. Shrinvanti katayanti, hearing and chanting. Tapandi vipadastapan, the ordinary material sufferings don't impinge on their consciousness that much less, because their minds have gone to me. You're absorbed in thinking of Krishna. We saw this amazingly with Srila Prabhupada. The last few months, the doctors were amazed. He wasn't eating, and so he was, getting very, very emaciated. And they were saying an ordinary person would be writhing in agony because the nerves are pressing against the bone. There's no muscle, But Prabhupada was lying there stoically. He was even translating, and people would come and visit him, and he would greet them and everything. It was an example of mystic power. So that's the idea, is that absorption in Krishna consciousness becomes so attractive that the mind is enthralled and you're hardly even aware of the externals. And so priya, apriya, you just tolerate it. You're on that fixed platform. That's the idea. Okay, now, text 21. This is one of my favorites of all time. Yehi sangsparshaja boga. All right. You ready? I'll do it slow. Yehi sangsparshaja boga. Dukkayo naya evate. Adyantabanta kaunteya. Nateshu ramate buddha. An intelligent person does not take part in the sources of misery, which are due to contact with the material senses. O son of Kunti, such pleasures have a beginning and an end, and so the wise man does not delight in them. Okay, we'll explain it. Purport: material sense pleasures are due to the contact of the material senses, which are all temporary because the body itself is temporary. A liberated soul is not interested in anything which is temporary. That in itself is a revolutionary statement. But knowing well the joys of transcendental pleasures, how can a liberated soul agree to enjoy false pleasure? In the Padma Purana it is stated, Ramante yogino nante satyanande charatmani iti ramapadhanesu, iti ramapadenaso ampadam brahma vidhiyate. The mystics derive unlimited transcendental pleasures from the absolute truth, and therefore the supreme absolute truth, the personality of Godhead, is also known as Rama. This is very appropriate because tomorrow is the appearance day of Rama, Balarama. In the Srimad Bhagavatam also, 551, it is said, Nayam deho deha bhajang haloke Krishtam kamanada David mujange tapo divyam puttakayena sattvam shuddhye jasman brahmasaukyam tvanantam. My dear sons, there is no reason to labor very hard for sense pleasure while in this human form of life. such pleasures are available to the stool-eating hogs. Rather, you should undergo penances in this life by which your existence will be purified, and as a result, you will be able to enjoy unlimited transcendental bliss. Therefore, those who are true yogis or learned transcendentalists are not attracted by sense pleasures, which are the causes of continuous material existence. The more one is addicted to material pleasures, the more he is entrapped by material miseries. And the more one is addicted to Krishna, the less he is affected by material miseries. So that's a good addiction. Prabhupada was asked, he was talking to John Lennon and Yoko Ono. He was living there at their place in near London, before they had the manor, before they had anything in England. So he lived there with the devotees that were staying there. And they wanted to have an interview, so he's sitting there. And they were famous as being kind of, real heavy-duty addicts. In fact, there was a picture on the wall of them. They were obviously high. So Prabhupada knew exactly what was going on. So John Lennon asked, well, how can one recognize the actual guru or the spiritual master? Prabhupada said, you have to find someone who's most addicted to Krishna, and that's the guru. He gave it to him on there. Understood. So that it's just like that, because when you read the Chaitanya Charitamrita, that's the postgraduate, but everyone can read it. And you see the Lord Chaitanya, especially in Ancha Leela, he would meet with Ramananda Roy and Sarup Damodar mostly, and would share with them. And they would stay up all night, and they're hearing the songs of Gita Govinda and other Krishna Karnamrita. And Lord Chaitanya was just tasting it so much. He was exhibiting all these crying and all these things, and sometimes he would get out of the gambhir and he would go and fall in the ocean. And it was almost at near the end of the book, it says, and his body could not sustain, he was, the emotion, the incredible emotions and the things that were going on. So that's an extreme example, but the point is that I've seen, I recently read this book about Yamuna Devi, which I highly recommend. It's called Yamuna, A Life of Pure Devotion, or something like that. It was put together by her longtime companion, Dina Tarini Dasi. But it shows, Prabhupada said, she reached a level of bhava. And even in her final days, final year, she was suffering from some disease, But she was chanting, and in the last stage, she just lay down on the bed. She was alone, and she had her hand in her bead bag, and she was fully dressed and laying at her deities that she'd worshipped for many years, Vana Bihari. And she was, chanting, and she passed off. And they found her the next day. She had a little smile on her face, And so, we've seen also with Rajendanandana Prabhu and in Shamali, they were in a very high state of Krishna consciousness. So it's possible even for us to achieve that state where you really, it's such a wonderful boon if you can have devotees around you. You can't imagine how important that is. But it's possible because of the power and the mercy of Lord Chaitanya, making it available even to us who are, I know myself, basically disqualified. But if we follow the program and we get serious about Krishna consciousness, we can refine our consciousness, purify, so that we can experience these what we're reading about here. Akshayam Ashnute, Sukham Akshayam Ashnute, enjoying unbreakable happiness. And Ramante Yogananda, Satyanande Chidatmani. Anante means endless. Even the idea of endless happiness sounds like a fantasy, because all we know is material happiness, which obviously is temporary. But that's because it's limited by the material body. If we're enjoying soul to soul, the soul is unlimited. Certainly the Supreme Soul is unlimited. And we can aspire for that. This idea, I love this verse by Rishabdev. This is the beginning of his teachings. And Prabhupada, when this book came out, this fifth canto was part of the marathon. You've heard of the 17 books in 2 months marathon? Have you heard of that? That's 1975. Like the books were piling up. I was in the middle of it. I'm in New York working on the fourth canto. And, it took a long time. It took like a year for the fourth canon to come out. It was too long. Prabhupada's already in the fifth canon. He already wrote the CC. The books weren't coming out, and this was a big crisis. So everything became consolidated in L.A. So I got to move from New York to Los Angeles. I was part of that. And by Krishna's arrangement, I was able to participate in this marathon. I didn't edit this chapter, but the fifth canon was part of it. And when the book actually came out, Prabhupada started, wherever he went in India, he was in India, he would go here and there, he would always give a lecture on this verse. So you look in all the recordings of his lectures, and suddenly you find, well, there's like 12 lectures on this one verse, so it's very important. So Nayam Deho Deha Bhajak Niloke. Niloke means in human society. One who has taken his birth in human society. Kashtan Kaman. The verse begins with the word na, not. You should not struggle very hard. Kashtan, to achieve Kaman, material sense pleasure, which even those stool-eating hogs can enjoy. In other words, that's not what a human being should do. Rather, tapo divyam, a very famous phrase. Tapo divyam means one should embrace transcendental, divine, purifying penance or austerity. You have to have some austerity, But the austerities in Krishna, it's manageable. We can do it. And they're all aiming at one thing. Oh, he's addressing his son's putrika, by which your existence, sattvam, can become purified. Purified of what? Purified of lust, anger, greed, illusion, madness, all of these unwanted desires that are in our heart right now. That can be purified. And from that purification, Brahma Saukyam Tvanantam. Saukyam means sukha, means happiness, but it's spiritual happiness. Brahma Saukyam, which is anantam, endless. It's endless in scope and it's endless in time. And that's just contrast to the kaman, to the material sense pleasure, which is flickering and self-frustrating and binding. So the whole thing is right here, and he goes on, which I won't, his teachings after that are also very, very seminal, they're very important. But this verse encompasses the whole thing. In other words, understanding the value of human life, don't waste it, but rather, accept the discipline of bhakti yoga so that we can come to the point of endless happiness. We still want to enjoy, whether we're materialists or spiritualists. But the materialists are enjoying a little bit and then suffering a whole lot, right? A little flickering sense pleasure, and then birth, old age, disease, and death, and, nuclear war. It's unreal. Whereas the transcendentalist undertakes, especially in this age, some reasonable tapasya. It's not too much, but it is there, and then comes to the point of enjoying forever on unlimited, ever increasing happiness. We have to have faith that it exists. So what should you invest? What should you invest your time and energy and money in? Materials happiness or spiritual happiness? Obvious. The answer is obvious. Okay, any questions on this verse? This is my favorite verse. Maybe we'll read it again next session. Yeah. Oh, by the way, when we finish with the question, turn the mic off, because otherwise that tends to, it messes it up for the internet crowd.
Hi, Dravida. I don't know if this is in the teachings of Lord Chaitanya, but you were talking about how the bhavas or the premas that Lord Chaitanya was exhibiting, he passed, or he, ascended, had his Mahasamadhi at age 48, is that correct?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
What was the, I don't know if this was in teaching of Lord Chaitanya, but what was his cause of, why did he leave so early?
Oh, why did he leave so early? Well, he was there on a mission, and he'd accomplished that. He'd spread the Dharma of the age. He taught Rupa and Sanat Goswami. The books were there. The movement was there. And he had exhibited the highest levels of bhakti in Antya Lila, and it was arranged that Raghunath Das would go to, who had witnessed it all, and there were all of these notes from the Srupdhamma, and then it was given to Krishna Savaraj, and he was able to write it. So that was there for posterity. So he had shown, he had accomplished his mission. He had come, Krishna came with Lord Chaitanya for two reasons, internal and external. The external reason was to spread the Sankirtan movement of dancing and chanting, and all that we have here, which is feasible for us, not going to the Himalayas that we can't do and we don't need to do. So that was the external reason. And the internal reason, Lord Krishna had his own reason, but he wanted to experience himself from Radharani's point of view. There's always a verse. Shri Radhaya Pranaya Mahima Kidushovanayiva. This is Krishna's Kaviraj, I think it's an original verse with him, quoting Krishna, giving us what Krishna's ideas are from his own mind. That in order to understand the glory of Srimati Radharani's love, my own beauty and qualities that she experiences, if you will, through the lens of her love, she experiences it more than anyone else. And the happiness she feels from loving me and being loved by me, then with those desires of mine, Lord Krishna appeared from the womb of Sachi Devi like the moon appears from the ocean. In other words, he took birth as Lord Chaitanya. So Krishna had a certain desire to fulfill. It didn't depend on how long he would be around. And he fulfilled all that mission. And so then he went back to Goloka Vrindavan. That's all.
So he basically got to the point where he completed his mission, so he just gave up his body?
Yeah, and that giving up the body, that's also mysterious. There's no account of a funeral or anything like that. He was just, I'm not sure, I think he merged into the body of one deity. It said. So that's, pretty amazing also. But it's inconceivable. Also in the 11th canto is the account of Lord Krishna's leaving. But it's like he didn't leave a material body or anything like that. It's all very special.
Interesting. Thank you.
Yeah, Hare Krishna. All right, I think we should adjourn 8:11. All glories to Srila Prabhupada. Thank you for coming. Sorry I came late. I got so enwrapped in what I was doing. Sure. Okay, so we'll